All right, I just got a notification that we can start. So we are recording this. So any of you that either have to kick off early or if you have to tune out of here and there, the recording will be available here and there, not too far after we are done here today. So thank you very much, Plug and Play, and all of you 37 people for joining me online. My name is Nathan Gold, and I, for the next 2 hours of your time, are going to take you through two main sections of helping you prepare for how to present your businesses to your events at Plug and Play, especially your expos and your online demo days, effectively, with passion, and with impact. So it's a very different world we're living in today in terms of how we're presenting. There are some overlaps, but I hope that after these 2 hours, you realize that when you're presenting to people on the other side of the world over a camera, it is no longer a nice to have. It's a must have. And it'll probably continue this way for quite some time because we all know the value of presenting over a camera. But the problem I see over the last 6 months is people are really messing up in terms of doing what they would normally do in a room full of people. So the first half of this webinar is primarily about how to captivate your audience, things you can do in your pitch to get their attention, get them curious, get them wanting to know more. And then the other half is going to be spent on how to really take advantage of presenting to the camera. Before we begin, I'd like to invite all of you, wherever you are on the planet, to either scan this QR code that's on your screen right now, or open up a tab in your browser and go to slido.com, put in PNP as the event, and then you will be able to ask me questions anytime you want. So because this is a webinar, we're going to go through the whole content first, and then we'll go into Q&A where I can take the questions that you've been asking me throughout the first hour and throughout the second hour so that we don't have to necessarily have people coming in and out of mute. There's too many people to try to say who wants to ask a question, and it will allow you to just ask me questions throughout without even thinking about it. So could I please ask someone out there right now, let me just double check to see if anybody, could someone just, one of you 42, just ask a question so I can see that my panel on this side is coming up with your request. Any question you want. Perfect. All right, test question, test question. Thank you very much. So again, anytime you want, ask your questions, and then before you ask your question in the Slido screen, double check to see that somebody hasn't already asked that question, and then if so, you just upvote it. And then eventually the number of questions that are most popular will float right up to the top for me when we get into Q&A. Okay, with that in mind, let me take you through my content. First of all, as a coach, I feel like my job is to get you prepared for any type of presentation or pitch or speaking opportunity that you have where you need to be persuasive. Okay, being persuasive is different than informing. And the kind of pitching that all of you are doing is persuasive pitching. You're trying to persuade your audience to either take some action or give you some resources, whether that's money, referrals, advice, a hug, I don't know. And so I'm here to give you tools, all sorts of tools and tips and techniques that you can use that are proven that will help you be better prepared for anything you're faced with. Now, what I'm coming to you with here is 12 years in the making, plus my entire career before that. So for the last 12 years, I have been working with TED presenters and TEDx presenters to get them prepared for their high stakes presentation, like presenting in front of Bill Gates in the front row and Warren Buffett and Al Gore. And I've also been working with Plug and Play for nearly 10 years, maybe 11 now, I haven't double checked, to get all of you ready for your expo pitches. And then eventually one day when we get back to our tables, we'll be able to entertain the people that come to our tables. But I understand that Plug and Play has got that covered because now you're going to have virtual tables where people can come and visit you after the expo. And I'm very excited that that type of thing is taking place. So enough about me. Let's do a little warm-up exercise, because I always believe that after working with people for so many years, trying to help them make their pitch more clear, simple, and more impactful, is that most of you are overthinking the whole process of what to say and how to say it to your audiences. Many of you are looking for formulas or pitch decks from Airbnbs of the world that raised X millions and millions of dollars, and you figure, oh, I'll just take their deck, stick my content in there, and hope it works for them like it did for them. I'm here to suggest to you that really doesn't work. It could be a way you start, but it typically, if you just take somebody else's deck and stick your stuff in it and try to pitch it, it's not going to be the same, because it's missing the you. So let's prove to you in a clear little exercise that you're overthinking what you're trying to do here in terms of persuading an audience, and how much fun it can be when you relax a little bit. All right, up on the screen, I'm going to put a sentence right now, and that sentence is in English. I would just like you to read the sentence to yourself one time. And don't try to figure out what it means, because it really doesn't have a meaning. It's just, I want you to read that sentence. Ready? Go. Okay. I suspect by now everybody has read it at least once. I'm going to take it off the screen. And now I'm going to put the very same sentence back up on the screen. Exactly the same sentence. So you don't have to remember what was that sentence. And I'm going to ask all of you to count all of the F's that you see in that sentence. That's it. And when you have your number, just jot it down or keep it in your head. It's okay. Now, there's no trick here. Honestly, I'm not a magician trying to tell you there's no trick and there really is a trick. There is no trick here. So let me tell you a few things that audiences have always tried to make this more complex than it is, which clearly points to the fact we're overthinking it. There's nothing hiding. There's no white F's on the white background. There's no F's, black F's on the black background. There's no F's hiding inside the uppercase E's. I don't know, people make this stuff up. They say, oh, it can't be that simple. No, it is that simple. I am only looking for uppercase F's. Oh, and the last thing is, it can appear anywhere in the sentence. Ready? Go. And double check yourself if you want. It's okay. Okay, time's up. So if you got 3, which is what many people get, that's not the right number. There's more. If you got 4, which some people get, that's not the right number either. If you got 5, which some people get, that's not the right number either. And believe it or not, there are 6. If you got 6, it doesn't mean you got an A, it just means you saw them all. If you got 3, it doesn't mean you failed. All it means is that you didn't see everything that was in front of you. I'll put it back up. They're right there, staring you in the face. Let's see, somebody's sending me a chat. Okay. Do you see the 2-letter words now? If you miss the 2-letter words, it's not uncommon. Many people miss those 2-letter words because they're overthinking it or they're underthinking it. Either way, this little exercise just hopefully proved to some of you that perhaps something that's staring you right in the face could help you be more impactful when you're describing to somebody what your product or service does. For instance, your opening line, how you captivate your audience, how you get your audience engaged. Perhaps what you're saying is so boring that they tune out, whereas all you need to do is maybe switch it up with something so that you can get their attention and be more engaging. And that's what this presentation is all about. So my goal for you here today is to give you tools, tips, and techniques that will help you stand out. Now, in some cultures, standing out is really not a good thing, but in Silicon Valley, at Plug and Play Tech Center, if you don't stand out, you're going to get lost in the noise because the startup world is very, very crowded. So my suggestion to you is if you're not comfortable standing out, get comfortable. And I'm not suggesting that you stand on your hands or you do anything ridiculous. I'm just talking about you've got to bring it. You've got to bring your best game, your A game when it comes to pitching your businesses, or you're just going to end up like these other suits. You're just going to get lost in the noise. And no one wants you to get lost in the noise. You've been selected very carefully to be in the Plug and Play family. So use it to your advantage by being your best self. And every one of you on this call, all 50 of you, could take my tips, techniques, and tools and pitch on the very same day, and you will not sound the same, because I don't believe in formulas. I believe in each and every one of you doing your very best by bringing out your very best. And while some of you might be using a technique in the beginning that works for you perfectly, for someone else, it might not work perfectly. So that's why I offer you multiple ways to accomplish the same goal. Speaking of goals, there are always two questions that I ask my clients when they call me for one-on-one coaching. First question, and these are the same questions I hope you ask yourself before you even decide what you're going to say in your pitch. Number one, who's the audience? So once you understand a little bit about who the audience is and what they care about and how it relates to what you're doing, then you can pick the right information, the right stories to use with that audience. The second thing I always ask people is, I didn't have a slide for it. The second thing I always ask people is, what is your goal for this pitch? And when your goal is set, whether it's, I'm looking for a second meeting, I hope they give me a referral, I'm looking for investment, although the goal of a first meeting to get investment is very unrealistic. I know all of you probably understand it's going to take more than one meeting. So what's your goal of every pitch? And each one of your pitches can have a different goal. And because of the different goal and the different audience, it's really important that you realize you've always got to customize your presentation for that audience and to reach your goal. And sometimes you'll get lucky. For a couple of weeks, you'll be able to use the same presentation over and over and over again. And all you do is change what you say. Whereas sometimes you might have to completely redo your deck because so much has changed in your business. For example, the business you were pitching in November and December is probably a very different business that you're pitching today. Or you may have adjusted your message based on what's happened over the last few months. So here are the three buckets I want to talk to you today about in this part of the presentation, which is what you say, the verbal aspects of your pitch, the what you say. The second part of it is how your voice sounds. And the third part of it is how you look when you're presenting. So the first hour is going to be about the verbal and the vocal. The second hour will be all about the visual and how to take advantage of presenting over the camera. So let's start with a little exercise, because I always like to have a before and an after in terms of the kinds of things I'm going to share with you here today. Just take 2 or 3 minutes right now, grab a piece of paper or open up a notepad or a Word document. And please answer these two questions that you see on the screen today, right now, which is, who are you? In other words, I want you to start, I've just bumped into you, I don't have a name badge, you don't have a name badge, we're at the same conference, and I say to you, hey, who are you and what does your company do? Write down the answers to those two questions, please. And then we'll come back and visit that later. Take two minutes now, please, and just write down what you would normally say. This replaces the exercise as if I was in a room with you right now, although 50 people is an awfully big number to go through. But I would pick some of you and say, so who are you and what does your company do? And who are you and what does your company do? And if we had under 25 people, I'd go around the entire room and I would tell you, you have no more than 1 minute to tell me that. So don't spend too much time. I'll be quiet. You go ahead. even if you know the answer by heart, that you would just spill it out. I'd like you to jot it down, because that way you'll have a before and an after to compare it to in writing. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about the verbal. Now, depending on the situation, if the audience doesn't know the exact amount of time that you have to pitch for, then I'm here to suggest to you that whenever you're pitching to an audience, one-on-one or one-to-many, that you're missing an opportunity to give that audience a virtual hug to make them realize how important they are to you. And it's not necessarily what you're thinking. To me, there's a beginning to the beginning, which means you can do something before you actually begin, which comes from a book I read when I had to do my very first training class when I was 23 years old. I had no idea what a presentation was, and I read this book given to me by my boss, and the one thing I took away from this book that I've used in literally every training class, every product demo, every meeting, every sales meeting, every time I did it with you here today. And you'll hopefully understand that there are 6 signals that every audience needs to hear from you as a presenter, as a speaker. And it's very easy to add the first 4 right into the beginning, and the last 2 can be used anywhere else. So here's how it works. Normally, I would ask you, what was on your mind when you came to this webinar today? What's like one of the questions you have on your mind? And my guess is this going to be a good use of my time? Am I going to learn something? In other words, the signal that you as a speaker need to make sure your audience feels immediately is that this will not be a waste of their time. Now, hopefully you felt that when you joined this webinar, first of all, that screen was up and ready to go. Nobody was fiddling around, although I did have to make a little change, but it was up and running for at least 30, 40 of you to come in. So you saw, okay, that's ready to go. I indicated to you that we have 2 hours together. The first is going to be spent doing this. The second is going to be spent doing this. And that hopefully gave you, okay, this person knows we've got 2 hours together. Great. And also hopefully that we started very close to on time. I'm a big fan of starting on time, which the easiest way to do that is just come in on time. I believe I was about 1 or 2 minutes off in thanking everybody for showing up on time or early, and that we're just waiting a couple minutes for the go. That way everybody that shows up early or on time feels good. And then the best way that you can recognize that you won't waste people's time, you don't need to do this at an expo, but let's say you're having a meeting like with an investor. All you need to do to start with is to say something like, Nathan, thank you so much for your time. I just want to verify that we still have until 10 o'clock together. And if anything's changed on your side, just let me know. And they'll say, you know, as a matter of fact, if we could finish up a few minutes early, that would give me time to blah, blah. So you check in with their time. Make sure that their time is known to be valuable and that you're willing to adjust your time based on their needs. And you will find that just this one signal alone by itself will change the dynamic in how people respond to you as a presenter and speaker. I personally have been using it for over 40 years. It works beautifully. And the outcome of just verifying that you still have the time that you think you have with people, especially in the investment community, just sings to them because they go, wow, somebody has finally asked me if my time is still available, even though you know you were given X number of minutes or an hour or something like that. The second signal that audiences are looking to hear from you as a speaker is that you know who they are in terms of perhaps their pain, not by name, of course by name would be great, but normally it's more about to let them know that you know what they're thinking, the problems, the challenges, the cause that they're involved with, and that endears you to your audience. And it's, by the way, just one sentence for each of these. You don't want to go off and spend a whole bunch of time on this because you haven't even gotten to the content yet. The third signal that every audience needs to hear from you is that you are well organized. Now, how do you hear that you are well organized? Well, it's a part of hearing and seeing as well. So you want to be your best organized self. Make sure your desk is clean, what they see behind you and in front of you and all of that. Organized. Nobody wants to do business with a disorganized person. If you're disorganized in your meeting and you're the presenter, that they assume that's who you're going to be when they do business with. All things equal, they're going to choose somebody who's more well organized than someone who's not. And some people have to fake it. It's okay to fake it. Number 4 is you need to make sure that your audience knows that you know your subject. Now, in the startup world, most people leave their team slide until the end or somewhere towards the end. While I'm totally okay with you putting it at the end, in the middle, at the beginning, I don't care where you put the team slide. But what's really important to your listeners is that within that first minute or 2 of you talking, maybe better yet in the first 30 seconds, they need to know that you know your subject as the speaker, not as the company, but as the speaker. Now, for 95% of you, you should be able to say something like, each of you have a humble brag. Good morning. I want to use the best time. We have 20 minutes left on the clock. Any change to that? No? Great. Let's get going. So for the last 3 decades of coaching people on how to present at venues like TED and blah, blah, and blah, blah, and blah, blah, I am so excited to be here with you here today to share with you the blah, blah, and blah, blah, because I know that many of you one day will be on the blah, blah, and the blah, blah, and the blah, blah. So let's get going. How long did that take? I know blah, blah, blah is not really words, but I let you know I'm not going to waste your time. I know who you are, and I know my subject. So it's not a, I did this, I did that, I'm a this, and I'm a that. It's more weaving in your humble brag into one of those first sentences so that people realize, wow, you're not just a man. You're not just a woman. You're a man who has a PhD that knows their subject. You're a woman that has your PhD and you know your subject. By the way, if you have a PhD, please put those letters on your front screen, on your first slide, but also it ought to be part of your humble brag. Even though I know some countries don't value their PhDs, but outside of those countries that don't value PhDs inside their countries, and I won't name names, outside of that country, a PhD means a lot. Now, if you don't have a PhD, you must have something else. For the 5% who are like, well, but I don't have much. I'm a new CEO. This is my first business, my first product. I'm just out of university. Maybe I just got laid off and I'm starting a new business. Well, then you might need to frame this, I know my subject, as we know our subject, meaning my partner and I, my co-founder and I, my team and I. Okay? Number 5. Number 5 is used somewhere during your pitch or presentation where you want to get everybody listening to pay instant attention to what you're saying. Now, experts say that people remember the first thing you say and they remember the last thing you say. Well, how do you get them to remember one thing in the middle? The trick is to use these words. I know I've talked about a lot of things here today, but here is my most important point. As soon as you say words very similar to that, or those words themselves, people will start paying attention and listen to the very next thing that you say. But you can only do this once per presentation. You can have 10 important things, but you can only have one most important thing. And then signal number 6, before I show it to you, I want to make sure that you understand that many startups, without getting any coaching from me or anybody else, this is how their pitch ends. Sometimes. I see this all the time. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, we are so thrilled. We have a lead investor for our seed round, and we're looking to just fill that rest out with people like you and you and you. And if you're interested, I would be delighted to talk to you at our table. Oh, I'm finished, by the way. If there are any questions that you may have, it's like, really? You just end without finishing. So it's really important that you let the audience know you are finished. And the simplest way to let the audience know you're done is with two simple words. Do I even need to say them? Thank you. That's it. Normally, if questions are following, you don't have to end with, and now I'm ready for your questions, because that's kind of an obvious ending. Why not just thank you for listening? Thank you for your time. Or just thank you. And then you're done. Now, I promise you, if you try to integrate some of these signals, if not just number 1 and number 5 into your, well, I value number 1 and 4 more important than 1 and 5, but that's up to you. But if you can get them all in, now you're talking. Okay, so now we've done the beginning to the beginning. Now let's talk about the beginning. And this is where I want you to realize there are many different ways that you can captivate an audience's attention with what people call a hook or a grabber, something to get people shocked into listening, or just whatever they're doing, break that pattern so that they'll listen to what you have to say. There are literally hundreds of ways of doing this, but let's talk about 10, just to let you know that there's more than 2 or 3 out there. So these are the kind of the top 10 that I would typically go to, and then there's many, many more to choose from. But the number 1 way that most people try to hook or grab an audience's attention is with questions. My suggestion to you is be very careful of those questions you're asking, because sometimes you're asking obvious, dumb, what I like to call dumbass questions that, why are you asking me something so obvious? So be careful of asking too many obvious questions, and also be careful of expecting people to raise their hand, because when you're online, that's really hard to do anyway. But when we get back into the rooms, when you ask people, can I, a show of hands, how many of you, you know what? Some cultures don't like to raise their hands. And you may get nobody raising their hands and you think it's your failure. And your only failure is you don't realize their culture doesn't like to raise hands because they don't want to be picked on. They don't want to be chosen. And even though you probably won't choose on them, that's what's ingrained in our heads. If I raise my hand, that means it's fair to pick on me. So ask perhaps a rhetorical question that where they only have to nod their heads or agree with a nod so that it's not an obvious question, and then move on to the real question you want them to answer. Number 2 is, I see people go up in front of a room and they say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine for a moment. And then they take me on the imagine ride. Now, imagine is a super great word in any language. It gets our brain to do whatever you say after the word imagine. But please don't be an amateur and put the word imagine at the front of every sentence in that story. I've seen this done, and it's like it completely loses its magic. You only need to say it once, and then they're there. Our brains are smarter than that. Number 3, statistics, numbers. These are probably the number 1 way to captivate an audience and shock them into something perhaps they've never heard before. So the easiest way to get an audience to listen is with numbers. Now, the problem with numbers is that sometimes you're using the same number that the investors have heard 5 dozen times already before. You know, for years we were hearing, in the year 2020, there's going to be 50 billion devices in the IoT world connected to the internet. Well, if you start out with that even 2 or 3 years ago, everybody's already heard it. So my recommendation to you is be sure that the numbers you're using are fresh. And if they're not, then do something to the number to freshen it up. Perhaps you say, you know, everybody's talking about 97% blah, blah, blah. Well, what I'd like you to look at for a moment is the 3%. Nobody's talking about the 3%. And then you tie it back somehow to your 97%. Or bring your meeting to the 97%. And then they'll remember you, and they'll be more captivated by you instead of just the number. Number 4, quotes. Quotations are amazing tools, and you don't have to work too hard to find some quotes that kind of encompass the things that, the messages that you want people to be hearing, seeing, reading, or perhaps remembering from your presentation. So your quotes, they're all over the place. It's not hard to find quotes today. And frankly, anonymous quotes work beautifully. You know what I mean by that, don't you? Anonymous quotes. Number 5, humor. Humor is a beautiful thing. Now, when you're online in a webinar like this, humor is really hard. I mean, you have to almost imagine that people are smiling or laughing when you do your humor bit. The problem with that is, unfortunately, most of us, most presenters, you need to try out your humor statements a bunch in person and fail a lot in person to know where people are going to smile and laugh in your talks. This is not telling jokes, by the way. I'm not here to suggest that you as a presenter should get up there and tell jokes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about humor, where there's a humorous aspect to the way you're presenting something, or there's humor in the story that you're relating to somebody, so you tell it in a way that makes people laugh, but only because you've tested it so many times that every time you tell it, people laugh. I'll give you a for instance. So when I went through those 6 signals, when I get through number 5 and I say you can only use that once per presentation, the first time I said that in public with people in the room, people laughed and smiled. And I didn't quite understand why they did that. But then the second time I did it and they laughed and smiled again, I thought, oh, I understand why they're smiling, because, right, it's sort of a dry humor, is that you can only do it once. Because you can only do it once. I was being serious, but I discovered this humor moment. And now every time I go through the 6 signals, people smile or laugh at that moment. But I would never have been able to discover that with a webinar, because when we got to that moment, I didn't know if you were even looking at the screen or even listening. But in a room, obviously, I do. So humor is going to be a little bit harder when you're presenting online until you know that the humor works in the room. If it works in the room over and over and over again with your audiences, it's a pretty good chance. If you tell it the same way, you put the same pauses in, the same facial expressions, it should make people smile. I could have done a quick survey to find out how many of you smiled or laughed after I said that, but you get it. You understand what I'm saying here. Number 6, demo. Now, this is not necessarily an expo piece of, an expo start, hook, or grabber, but when you're meeting with people for the first time, especially investors, sometimes offering them a quick product or service demo can really ground the entire meeting. If you have to spend more than 2 or 3 minutes to describe what you're doing, then think of, perhaps, if it's appropriate, offering your listeners, would you like to see a 2 or 3 minute product demo to start with, and then we can have a dialogue after that? Sometimes people will say, oh, thank goodness, somebody who wants to show me their product before they try to sell me on their product. And I got to tell you, sometimes when you show people your product or demonstrate your service that you're providing, it can completely change the dynamic of the meeting. Even showing wireframes or hand-drawn diagrams, you know, those prototypes you're making in the early part of lean startup, those work too. Number 7, props. If I wanted to talk to you about a water bottle that I'm designing right now, I would pick this thing up and I would say, we're designing a water bottle similar to this. This is my prop. This might not be the real thing, but this is my prop. So feel free to grab things, show things, whether it's literally what you're doing, or perhaps it's a figure of speech. Maybe you're doing something with microwave safety, and you show this kid's toy as a microwave, and you put it up next to your ear, and you say, would you want to put one of these on your ear? I don't know, but that's what somebody did many, many years ago in the first year or 2 when Bluetooth, I'm pretty old, sorry. When Bluetooth first came out, there was a company that was just banging hard on Bluetooth and the dangers it's going to have. He held up a microphone, this little toy, to his ear and said, well, if you feel comfortable with hanging one of these on your ear, then go get your Bluetooth headsets. And boy, a long time, I think that's 15 years ago, that image is still in my head, even though I wear a Bluetooth headset sometimes. But I question, should I wear that thing? He put that in my head. All right. Number 8, sorry. We'll get back to Sam in a moment, but Sam represents 3 tools that are so powerful, we need to talk about them on their own. Number 9, your value proposition. Your value proposition, when you speak it, sometimes it's very powerful, but when you write it for someone else to read, it may not have the same effect. So if you're lucky enough to have a value proposition that's powerful in when I hear it, and it doesn't go on for more than a few 10-ish, 12-ish words, then that could be perhaps be what you start with. And then number 10. The 10th one is my favorite. Just tell stories. Your story. When you start up and you say, thank you so much, Ms. Investor and your team for letting me share our journey with you. So back 6 years ago, when I first blah, 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 and you just wrap all of your stuff that you want to say into either one story or multiple stories that you tie together elegantly so that when you get to the end, people can almost retell someone else at dinner that night what they just heard you say. And I'm here to suggest to you that before you go to the features and functions and things that your product or service does, your story, especially in the early stages of your business, when raising a seed round and a Series A, your story is what's going to make you stand out, folks. Remember, I started with what's going to make you stand out? How will you stand out? My suggestion is you don't have to look too far, because your story, if told properly, will make you stand out to the person who presented in front of you and the person who presents behind you. You will stand out because your story is unique. All you need to do is figure out what pieces of your story do you need to use to persuade your audience that you should get a second meeting, or that you should get questions that will help that audience understand more about your story. So there you go. There are 10 different grabbers, hooks, and things you can use. I'm going to move on to number 8. Number 8 is especially useful when you have something you want to tell somebody that you do and it's not easy. It's maybe complex. It's not so powerful. You know, back in 1963, anybody working at NASA, if you ask them what they did at NASA, they would say, we're helping to put a man on the moon. We're helping to put a man on the moon. 9 words that clearly indicate what they're doing and the value of what they're doing. You don't have to say any more to get people interacting and saying, wow, tell me more. The problem is most of you don't have that. I'm guessing, because after 12 years, 90% of the people I talk to don't have that kind of powerful, big, quote unquote, big idea. There are some, but often I get the response that, oh, my stuff's too complex. I can't do that in one sentence. Or I get, oh, our stuff's too confusing. We have a bank of PhDs working on this stuff. How do I tell somebody in one sentence what I do? Or it's boring. Sometimes we do stuff that's boring. I'm sorry. If you're in cloud storage, it's boring. If you're in the encryption world, unless you are in the encryption world, it's boring to me. But that doesn't mean you can't make $1 billion company out of boring, complex, and confusing stuff. The problem is you need to make sure that people understand what the heck you're doing in the early days so that you get to that point. And then sometimes you tell somebody what you're working on and they say, oh, that sounds like, and they just list out another company that sounds like, even if they're wrong. Well, when any of these things happen, I suggest you use SAM. And SAM stands for 3 tools. The first one, let me illustrate through a quick story. So I would normally ask you, has anybody ever been on this airplane where you feel weightlessness, where you actually get to feel what it's like to not have, you float in the air. It's cool. I've never done it, but I've talked to 2 people who have done it, and they tell me that it feels like floating in water, like floating in a pool or scuba diving. That's the most common thing people say it feels like. It's also quite fun. Now, it's not actually weightlessness. It's called microgravity. If I had a PhD in microgravity right now, right? That's my thing, let's say. And I come in to talk to 48 of you about what it's going to be like when you get up in this weightless experience. And I start scaring you with all the things that microgravity could potentially do to your bones, your cells, your brain, your muscles, your everything else. You might get really like freaked out. But if I wanted to get you to understand how much fun it's going to be up there, all I need to do is say something like, you know, when you feel this weightless moment, which we actually call microgravity, I don't want to waste your time by describing all this stuff, microgravity. That's my thesis, might be blah, blah, blah. It feels like you're floating in water. And wait till you get up there and feel that. Now everybody's happy and they're thinking, oh, microgravity is like floating in water. So now I can skip the whole scientific explanation, unless the audience is expecting the scientific explanation. Obviously, PhD to PhD, you can't say, oh, microgravity is like floating in a pool, because they would slap you and say, yeah, really. Now tell me what it's really like. One of the best, most powerful statements I have ever heard as a grabber, as a hook, about 8 years ago, came from a presentation at the Kauffman Foundation. Everybody had 3 minutes on stage. I can't remember exactly which one it was, maybe the 7th, 8th. It was starting to get a little bit tiresome and we needed a break. And this guy jumps up on stage and he doesn't show the screen you're looking at yet. He has a blank screen up on the screen, and a blank slide on the screen. And he says, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am thrilled to be here to share with you the machines that we build that turn water into money. He said that, and we all cracked. I was in the room. We all cracked up. We looked up. We stopped looking at our smartphones. Well, what the hell? Really? And right on the screen, he puts a picture of this. What is this? This is a canal turbine. When you throw it into, it's about a yard or a meter wide, and there are micro turbines under those yellow housings. When you throw this into a rushing waterway and tie it off to the side and plug it in, as soon as those flappers start spinning, you're generating free electricity. It's like a windmill in the water, so to speak. Oh, see that simile right there? But let's keep on this one. So when he said, we build a machine that turns water into money, is it true? If I surveyed all 47 of you, probably half of you would say yes, 40% would say no, 10% would go, well, I can't decide. And that's because they are using SAM. Now let me show you the opposite effect as a metaphor for what most of you do when you try to grab the audience's attention by being too literal. Like you try to tell them exactly what you do in literal terms so that they get it. And I'm here to suggest to you, it doesn't matter if they get it that way. It's, can they remember it? Does it cause them to feel something? And can they tell somebody else 2 hours later what they heard from you? Let me switch it up and show you now. I'm a normal entrepreneur, everyday person. I've had no coaching from Nathan or anybody else out there, and I walk up on stage and I'm going to be literal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here to share with you our canal turbines. And we all go, oh, I'm going to go back to what I'm doing, because I don't care about canal turbines. I don't own a canal. I don't live near a canal, and I certainly don't need a turbine. There's all kinds of negative yellow lights going off in my head when you try to be too literal sometimes, except in the case where you're helping to put a man on the moon. Be literal. If you are helping to cure cancer, then say it. But you don't have to, you might have to use a tool if you're doing something like canal turbines, which people don't care about until they understand the value of what you're doing. And the secret to getting people's heads in a space where they'll give you more time to explain what you're doing is by using similes, analogies, and metaphors. You've known about these things for your whole life, pretty much. I mean, since you started speaking, we speak in similes, analogies, and metaphors. I read somewhere a few years ago that the average person uses a simile, analogy, or metaphor in their everyday language every 40 seconds. But you don't realize how many metaphors, similes, and analogies we actually use. In fact, you would not be able to really interpret the world around you without them. And so I'm imploring you to think about perhaps all you need to do to captivate your audience or get them to just stop in their tracks and wonder, what the heck did you just say? Wow, I want to know more about that, is check out perhaps a good SAM. But also a caution, which is be careful about using SAM in the same simile everywhere in the world, because perhaps it might only be understandable in your culture or where you happen to live. There are Irish sayings, I won't spend the time now, but there are fun Irish sayings that unless you're in certain parts of Australia, you won't know what it means. So you have to sometimes test them to make sure they come across with impact without telling people what they mean. All right, so now I want to take a quick 2-minute break before I let you take a real break and walk away from your screens and go get a coffee or use the loo. Just based on what I've said right now, I want you to take back the exercise that you wrote down earlier, and now see if anything you've heard up to this point would change what you say in the answer to number 2. And if you have something, jot it down. Maybe you thought of a good simile, analogy, or a metaphor, or perhaps you have a more clear way to tell people what you're doing in, let's say, under 15 words-ish. Just take a couple minutes, write that down, and then I'll finish up this section and we'll move on. Okay, you can always continue working on this, and frankly, the way you tell someone what your company does or what your product or service does is one of those things that I hope you realize coming up with one answer that you use with everybody you meet is a lot to ask of yourself. You very often have to change 1 or 2 of the words based on who you're talking to. It could be as simple as talking to a man or a woman, and based on what you say your company does, you might just change it based on who they are, so that you get a better response or more impact out of what you say. All right, to wrap this section up and to give you a break, I just want to quickly talk about stories, because stories, as you've already heard me say in number 10 as the most effective way to captivate an audience, I'm not here to teach you how to tell stories, because there's plenty of help on that. I just want to be the next one in line to convince you that if you're not using your story, then you're missing out on one of the most important pieces of your puzzle, especially in the initial relationships that you're making with investors and even partners who are investing in you. So if you ever expect to get up on that TED stage, metaphorically speaking, and make the impact that these people are making, you need to tell better stories. Why do stories work so well? Well, we relate to stories almost instantly because that's how our brains are wired. Before you can read and write, you were hearing stories, you were telling stories, and we relate to stories. The second, we remember stories more than we remember anything else. And what's really fun about stories is people will retell your story. And sometimes retelling someone else's story is so much fun that it gets retold over and over and over again. And when you tell that story to somebody else, they tell that to somebody else, to somebody else. Next thing you know, you get a call from somebody in Scotland that says, I heard about your story. And you say, well, who'd you hear that from? And then you dial it back and back and back, and you trace it back. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, this stuff really works, because it does. Now, all of the stories that you could possibly share with your audiences are currently, in my guess, stuck in your head. They're up here. They're up here in the team as well, in the other team heads that you're working with. You need to get them out of your head, because if they're up in your head, there's no way to take an inventory of them. There's no way to remember all the great stuff that's happening in your businesses in 3 to 6 months from now. What if I asked you to tell me a story that happened 3 to 6 months ago that was really, really powerful? You'd probably come up with a couple, but my guess is there's even more. And unless you keep track of them, they're going to get lost. So here's a simple tool you can use to keep track of all of your stories. It's a table. You open up a Word doc or a Google Doc and you create a table with 4 columns. 4 columns for 4 types of stories. These are the 4 basic kinds of stories that Craig Wortman in the book called What's Your Story out of Chicago recommends. You can, of course, do whatever you want, but this has been working. I've been passing this out to my clients for 12 years. I have multiple story matrices because I have so many these days. So success, failure, and fun stories, easy. Legend stories, a little complicated. Most people don't know what they are. Legend stories are the kinds of stories that when you tell them, it's like a legendary story because they're always told in a way that, wow, that was incredible. So for example, if your CTO was working for, let's say, Salesforce.com and you wooed them away from Salesforce.com to join your company, that could be a legendary story because perhaps that person is one of those really important people and somehow so those kinds of legendary stories. Now the row columns, the row labels are up to you, but I'll suggest as startups that you'll have all 6 of these kinds of stories. If you don't want to have mentor stories, then throw that row out. It's okay, but you'll have customer, investor, sales, pitch, and me stories for sure. Now, here's how it works. As soon as you get a success story, and it's, let's say, a sales story, you go into the success column, you go into the sales row, and you put something that triggers your mind as to what that story is. Now, that trigger for me is, actually, it was more like back in 2005, in that June, I flew to London, I did this talk, we won a big deal. I could tell you the whole story now because that triggers my mind in every aspect. And you keep doing it over and over. So now for failure, if you have failure stories, write them all down because as a startup, I'll tell you this much, that investors love to hear your failure stories. They just love it. Anybody can talk about their success and they hide their failures. But when you have failures or things that don't go right and you share that with the results of what you learned or how you treat your customers now or how you treat other people now or blah, 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 or how your product gets released now because of that failure, you're telling that listener that you are vulnerable enough to share some failure, but you're also big enough to tell me how you fixed it. And that tells me more about you as a person than all the success stories in the world. So you keep doing this over and over and over and over again until the whole thing just gets to be filled up with stories. And then when you have to go do another pitch and you want to change up your presentation, pick up your story matrix, find out which stories might be good. And these all do not have to be first person stories, meaning they're your stories. You could have a story that you heard somebody else say. For example, in the legend stories, there's a story from Onset Ventures. It's not my story, it's his story, but I tell that story over and over and over and over and over and over again. So it's totally okay to use other people's stories and make them part of your story matrix. This is one of the most invaluable tools that I have as a presenter because when anybody asks me to do something a little different than what I'm normally accustomed to doing, I never freak out because all I have to do is pick up my story matrix and start picking out some of the stories that I don't use and fit them into what I need to do now. It's brilliant and it saves me so much time. Thank you, Craig Wortman. Now, to wrap up this hour, when you have to present at the expo and you have 2 minutes, three minutes, sorry, or 5 minutes with your mentors, and the timing is strict, the formula that you can use in your mind, if you write out your script to get a sense of what you might say, don't write it to be read, but write it to be spoken. Just keep the number 120 to 140 words per minute is what the average person speaks. So if you have a 3-minute pitch, you're looking at about 400-ish words to get them out in 3 minutes. And that will save you a lot of time from cutting. 2 more things on stories. When you start telling your story, make sure you understand that the first things you're saying in that story, about the first 10 or 15 seconds of that story, is when the mind of your listener decides if they're going to listen to the rest of the story. So don't waste time. Don't say things like, I'm going to start by telling you a story about when I was growing up on Long Island. Like, don't do that. Just say, good morning. When I was growing up on Long Island, and then just get into the story, because now you've got them and that first 10 seconds is being used properly. Finally, with stories, remember that when you're pitching your business, especially in that first or second meeting, keep it short, keep it to the point. Make sure you're not doing all the talking, because you want to get to know those people, get to understand their interests. You want to get to know as quickly as possible. And so I recommend that you take a lesson from the Hollywood producers and the people who make films all around the world. They make a movie trailer, which usually is a 2 to 3 minute thing, so that you get interested in seeing the movie. I'd like you to consider that your 3-minute pitch on stage or online is your movie trailer, not your movie. Keep it short. Keep people curious. Let them wonder. Let them be a little confused. Don't let them be confused on what you do, but let them stay in a curious state of mind, and you'll be surprised at how many more calls for a second meeting you might get. Now, when it comes to your storytelling, I just want to leave you with Simon Sinek as one of the most incredible storytellers on the planet these days. If you're not starting with your why and using the golden circle when you're presenting your businesses to your investors, you're really missing out on one of the most simple ways for you to connect on an emotional level with your audience. So I'm not going to spend any time on it right now, with the exception of just saying to you, if you haven't seen the TED Talk by Simon called How Great Leaders Inspire Action, please take a look at it. It's 18 minutes long, and it will help you understand how to kind of reorder some of the things you're saying in your pitch so that you can communicate in a more effective and emotional way. It's all about the golden circle, starting with your why, moving to your how, and moving to your what. But I'll leave that for you and Simon to get together in an 18-minute TED Talk instead of me taking the time right now. This is just to remind you that if you already know about the golden circle, go back to it. And if you don't, please watch Simon Sinek's talk and start thinking about how it might help you very quickly. Just take and restructure what you're doing in a slight way, so that all you have to do is literally take the golden circle, put your problem in as the why, your solution is the how, your what are the results. You need to wrap it with a hook and an ask and a close, and you're done. You're done. Now, of course, this is leaving out things like your 5-year projection. It's leaving out things like your barriers to entry, your competitive matrix, and all of that. And the question I would normally ask is, do you need those in order to achieve your goal? If yes, then put them in. If not, leave them out. But these are the basic 5 elements that you must cover with investors. You need to get them interested with a hook. You need to describe the problem if and only if the hook doesn't clearly state what the problem is. Then what are you doing about, how are you fixing that problem, and what are the results so far? And then what do you need to grow or scale your business? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the simplest way to look at what you have to do on the expo stage. Okay, I am going to now break out of my screen for a moment. I am going to remind you that you can ask your questions on the Slido page. Please feel free to do that. I'd like to give all of you a 10-minute break. When we come back from that 10-minute break, I'll look at any questions that have come in, and we'll cover the other section of how to take advantage about presenting online. So thank you so much for your time so far. I'll set the clock so you know when I'll start up 10 minutes from now. Take a break. Okay, so we are ready to continue, and let's start with the first question, and the only question that has come in so far, which is, thank you so much. I appreciate that this is outstanding content. And yes, the answer is this is being recorded, and you will more than likely receive an email from your contact at Plug and Play. Arsh, is that you or whomever? Yes, it is being recorded. Thank you for that question. Thank you for the upvotes. Check. Now I'm ready to move on because that takes care of all those questions. Simple as that. Now, I have to believe there are more questions out there. So if you do have any questions, you can still enter them into the Slido QR code that you see here or the web address. And if we don't get to finish all of the questions or answer all the questions today, if you at least put your name in there, maybe even just your name, then at least I can write the answer to those questions and get them back to Arsh, and then she can send them out to all of you. So just because you want an answer to a question doesn't mean you necessarily have to get it right this minute. So feel free and be happy to send them on as soon as they are finished and answered. So let's go ahead and go back to our Prezi. And also you will get a copy of the visuals that you're seeing as well. So the link to the Prezi is online, and I'll push out a PDF file for Arsh to include with the link if you want it. Just let me know. Okay, so before I move into the next big section of how to present online, which is a huge topic today, I want to segue into that by discussing your voice. This tends to be a topic that not many people really spend time thinking about, but as a coach, it's the first thing I listen for. And what am I listening for? Well, what do you think I'm listening for? I'm listening for things like, do you sound believable? Do you sound honest? Do you sound authentic? Do you believe in what you're saying? Does your voice sound like you believe in what you're saying? So it's more than just the sound of the words coming out, but it's the energy and the voltage that you put behind those words. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that you stand up there and present like crazy Americans, but I am expecting every one of you to find the voice that when you use it, it communicates 100% of your passion or 100% of your enthusiasm, your commitment, every fiber of your body needs to come across when you're pitching investors. Customers, partners, yes, but with investors, they want to know, can they trust you? Are you credible? Do you sound credible? And all of that, most of that is coming from the sound of the voice that you use for all the words that come out of your mouth. So while many people don't necessarily like the sound of their voices, I am here to suggest to you, get over it. You either need to get over the fact that you don't like your own voice, or find a voice that you can use when you're pitching. And then when you sit down with people over a table or just for a casual conversation, perhaps you have a different voice. It's okay to have 2 or 3 different voices. If you think about it, if any of you are parents, you know you have at least 3 voices that you use. All I'm suggesting here is that as a presenter, as a speaker, you need to find some vocal variety in your voice so that you're not boring. Try playing with tone, pace, pitch, volume, rhythm, or emphasis. There's a host of other things you can do too. And it's not just about being boring, it's about standing out. You might be a good speaker, but you still don't stand out. There's a lot of good speakers out there, but when they're done, they don't stand out. Why not? Well, perhaps they didn't do anything memorable. And when you use your voice, that could be the most memorable thing of all. Especially maybe you have a fun way of emphasizing a particular word or phrase, and they know you for that because you're putting more voltage or more energy behind words that you feel are more important when you present. Similarly to the way I've been presenting to you for the last hour and 18 minutes. Now, the voice that I'm using with you right now is not the voice that I use when I'm sitting with my wife over dinner. Definitely not. If it was, I'd be outside, she'd be inside, the door would be closed, the window would be closed, And she would say, now what? I'm kidding, sort of. My more natural conversational tone, I bring my voice up a little bit here, more like in this part of my head, whereas I'm presenting to you from way down here right now. I'm also not projecting as much as I would normally project in a room, and we'll talk more about that later on. The bottom line here to me is your enthusiasm must be felt by your audience. How does your audience feel your enthusiasm? How do you transfer your enthusiasm to your audience? Through your voice. Yes, you can have beautiful facial expressions, wonderful facial expressions, and you can be up there, you're doing all kinds of great gestures, but it's the voice and that energy behind the voice and the words that people receive that honest, authentic, and real, believable enthusiasm. Some people like to call this passion. Show your passion. I don't know. I never say that word because I don't believe it's sometimes believable, and sometimes people don't know their passion, but you always know someone's enthusiastic honestly, or they're disingenuous in their enthusiasm. Normally you can see through that pretty quickly. But when you find somebody that's genuinely enthusiastic about what they're doing, hopefully like me with this topic, you feel it. If you're not feeling it, then please tell me right away, because at the end of today, I'm going to go change what I'm doing. Because I know as a speaker that if I can't get you to feel my enthusiasm for this topic, then you're not going to make any changes. You won't take action, not as readily as you would if I do a good job knowing that my job as a speaker to persuade you to take action is to transfer my enthusiasm to you. That's it. That's my job. Now I just have to pick the things to say so that that happens. All right. I love quotes. Ralph Waldo Emerson is one of my favorites. I'll let you read it, and I hope you agree. The last thing about your voice is when you don't use it. What I mean by that is most presenters, once they start pitching, they don't pause on purpose, for purpose. They just keep going, and they go, click, and they go, click, and the next slide, click, and the next slide, click, and the next slide, click, 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 and we're done with no or very few pauses. So when you're thinking about the message that you want to share with your audiences and transferring your enthusiasm to them, it's really important that you understand that if you don't pause occasionally, they don't get a chance to think about, or more importantly, feel what you've just given them the chance to feel, because you're running on to the next thing. So try pausing occasionally here and there, and you might find that there's a total difference in how your audience reacts to the things that you're saying. In other words, give them time to let it create impact. And the other part of pausing is when you are answering questions, please don't say things like, "That's a great question," or "That's a good question," because they're not always great or good, and that's a disingenuous statement and response, in my opinion. All you need to do if you want to have a quick response is, "Thank you for that question, Nathan," or "Wow, that's a perfect time for that question right now. Thank you." But don't use BS and say, "Oh, that's a great question. Oh, that's a good question," because you're not, it's more of a, you get it. But between the thank you and the answer, you need to pause. If you don't pause, you're missing the opportunity to show the audience that they've just asked you something that's going to make you think for a moment, and that person should feel pretty good that they just asked you something that they're going to make you think. So you give that person recognition with the pause. You also show them that you are mature enough to pause before you jump on the answer, because you're confident to think on your feet. The quickness of the answer will often have a lot to do with how well the answer is accepted by the questioner. If you interrupt them, you're dead. Don't ever interrupt a VC or an angel asking you a question. even if you know what the question is. It's the same question you get 1,000 times every day. Don't roll your eyes. Make believe it's the first time you're hearing it, and let them ask it all the way through before you thank them or before you pause and then answer that question. Remember, your tone of voice is giving you away in most of the time. All right. Finally, accent reduction. 90% of my one-on-one clients have accents. And while accents are beautiful things, I'm here to suggest to you that if your accent is getting in the way of people understanding the words, seek out an accent reduction coach who can help you tweak some of the way you're saying certain words and phrases so everybody understands you. It's not to remove your accent, it's simply to reduce it on certain words or phrases. Okay. With that, let's head over to the visual and talk very quickly and simply. Without hesitation, I'm going to run right into a kind of a fun, quick, very easy on the eyes presentation for you to be able to understand how to take advantage of the camera when you're presenting online. And here we go. So the first thing is, since we don't have any questions that have been asked since the ones that I've already just asked, there's nothing to answer before we go on to the next section. This is where I would normally check before we move on. So now I have 10 things I want to just quickly throw out on the table for you, because this is not rocket science. Pretty much just like as most of the stuff I've just shared with you is not rocket science, like similes, analogies, and metaphors. I mean, we've all known about them, but are you using them for purpose? Perhaps that's the one thing you take away from the first hour. It's just similes, analogies, and metaphors. Oh my God, that will make it easier for you to talk about what you do. Same thing's going to happen in how to captivate your audience online. So here we go. Please pick up your smartphones, tablets, or go to a tab and please answer this question for me. You can scan the QR code right on the screen right now, or go to slido.com, put in PNP. Please answer, how many times have you presented online? Just want to get a quick sense for the 40-ish people that we have here online. Okay. Thank you. Keep going, please. Keep going. I need about another 10 or 12 of you. I'd love to hit the law of large numbers, which is 30, but that's okay. All right. So of the 12 people that replied so far, or the 14 now that have replied so far, 3 roughly, you know, well, there you go. 63% of you have only done it a few times. And only a few of you have done it a lot, and the rest fall like I've never done it. So now, through a very quick poll like that, I now know more about you and how to direct my comments on this topic to you. Super, thank you for doing that. Now, who is this presentation for? Well, it's for people that are doing one-to-one online or one-to-many. It's not if you're doing many-to-many. Now, the first thing I want to suggest to you about your online presentations, unless someone is scheduling your time online, I suggest you schedule it yourself and never start on the hour. Always start 5 or 10 minutes past the hour. Why? It'll make you stand out, and it'll allow more of your people to get to the meeting on time. I made a mistake today. I didn't encourage Arsh to start this at 9:05 or 9:10. My fault. Normally, I always start my meetings a few minutes past the hour so that people can finish up whatever they were doing before, and they can have enough time to switch over to get into your online meeting. And if they run a couple minutes late, they know they have a few extra minutes to get to your meeting. So you remove the stress and the anxiety that people trying to get to your meeting might have by giving them those extra minutes. In the old days when GoToMeeting and WebEx was out, boy, you had to give them 15 minutes to get in because they always had to download a new piece of software. So I'm going to give you a few tips like that throughout. But the first, number one, most important thing about presenting online is you must have good sound quality. If all else fails, you must be able to be heard. So check your microphones, check the source of the input, that it's set to the microphone you sound the best in. If it's not, and you don't have one, go buy one. They're not hard to find. They can easily be added to anybody's kit. If you really want to go professional and spend, 100, 200, or even more US dollars, you can get one of these types of professional microphones that just plug into the USB port or the USB-C port. And now you have it hanging over you like a podcaster might, and you get the top quality sound. You get top recording level quality. Do you need one of these? I don't know. Are you mobile? If you're mobile, don't get one of these because these things take up a lot of space and they're heavy. You're going to be in the same office every day, all day? Maybe. That's up to you. But get a good quality microphone. Number 2, we lose all eye contact with our audience when we're online, right? You're not in the room. You can't tell if people are looking at you. You can't tell if people are talking to somebody in the room right now because they turn off their camera and you can't even see them. And it's really obnoxious when you say, hey, can you turn on your camera, please? Because they might not want to. And I never ask, by the way. I'll kind of poke them a little and ask Zoom to ask them, but I never ask people to turn on a camera. If they don't want to turn it on, it's fine. But with your cameras, it's really important that you put the camera in the right location. And it is not in the right location with the gentleman I'm showing you right now, is it? You don't want your camera looking up the nose, your nose, and you don't want the camera looking down at you either, because then you have to look up at the audience. What you want to do is very simply move your camera roughly up to eye level or just a little bit above eye level. Now, for some of you, that's going to be a little hard because your monitors have your camera in one spot or your laptop has it in one spot. Well, if you can prop it up somehow, put it on some books, move it up, put it wherever it needs to be so that the camera is roughly in line with your eyes, kind of the image on the right here. And you will have a better experience. More importantly, your viewers will have a better experience because it'll make it seem like you're looking more at them. Now, before I show you my secret to how it makes it look, and hopefully you've seen that I am looking pretty much at you. I am making eye contact with you in 96% of my time presenting. And the way you do that is you have to fake out your head. You can't look at the 12 images on the screen. In this case, we have 48 people on the line. I took off my glasses, so I can't read the number. I can't look at all 40 of you and try to get some sense of what everybody's thinking. That's impossible. Maybe one day there'll be software that helps you understand that 64% of the people out there are smiling kind of thing, or they're happy and that sort of stuff one day. But you need to fake your head out and remember that the eyes of your audience are inside the lens of your camera. And so in my case here at my office where I'm working, my camera is a separate one from my monitor. I have it sitting on a little tripod in front of my screen so I can see what's on my screen, but I can also look directly into the camera so that you know I'm looking at you, making eye contact with you. And if you can move your camera around like this, it sure gives you kind of an added advantage to making it easier for you to maintain eye contact with your audience. Now, if you're mobile, I would not take all my kit with me when I go mobile because some of it's a little bit too large and I leave it set up for when I get back to my home office. But I always travel with a tripod, which is nothing more than a selfie stick with a tripod at the bottom that lets me pop up a quick, put in my smartphone and do a Zoom presentation or a Zoom meeting or any other meeting using video, or walking and talking. Can really be nice to do this as well. So one of my kit, it never leaves my bag, is a tripod. Now, I want to take a brief moment here and bring up a tip that I have noticed now after 12 years of presenting in rooms with people and seeing you stand on stage to present your very best of your best to an audience of 300 or 400 eyeballs, 300 or 400 people in the room. It's very energizing. It's very exciting to know that you're next. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage. And now you're next. You know, walking up on stage for a lot of people is really fun and it's new and it's exciting, or it's really nerve-wracking. But these days, and for the foreseeable future, we will be doing more and more of these online presentations, online demos, online pitching. So my suggestion to all of you is to remember and remind yourself that we are in our homes talking to other people in their homes. So my suggestion here is dial it back a little. Don't try to be the same person that you are when you stand on stage with that bigger projection of a voice, even if you're mic'd up. Dial it back a little bit. Try to show more empathy. And you can do that by perhaps, instead of pitching, I'm going to close the window. Instead of pitching, perhaps be more conversational in the way you present your business opportunities these days. And, be softer in your tone and not so big and bold. Although go big and bold, but you can do it with less voltage is my point. Okay, you can turn the lights on without going full blast is a good analogy to think about. All right. Lighting, very important. Lighting is really important. If you want to be seen, you can't have too much light behind you, so try to avoid sitting in front of a window with sunlight behind you, because sometimes this happens. It all depends on your camera though. Sometimes you have cameras that get totally messed up with sunlight. Sometimes the camera loves the sunlight. But if you have too much sunlight and the camera doesn't know what to do, you could have one of these two effects. And therefore you then become a little bit hard to notice or hard to see. Although this guy, if he was in one of those smaller windows, he'd be the one that would stand out. So is this a bad thing? I don't know. It sort of is, because it's washing out his good looks. So be sure to not let the light behind you be too much, and that won't happen. For most webcams, unless it's a higher end webcam, and I'm talking probably $100 and up, with some real smarts built in, sunlight is going to kill you. It's terrible. And it moves, right? Obviously the sunlight moves. So you could start your meeting at 10 o'clock and by 11 o'clock, the sun has gone from this part of your face to that part of your face. And it's like you're getting a sun bathing along the way. So try to cover up the sun. And if you need to, get some lights. Get some lights that you can adjust the brightness, perhaps even the color of the lights. Basically, you just need 2 lights. I have 2 lights here. I'm not using them today because the sunlight on my camera, the camera loves the sunlight, but I have 2 lights sitting on my side here. They're inexpensive. I use these Casa bulbs. They're non-hub bulbs that let me control the entire intensity, the whiteness, and the color if I want to, so I can make all sorts of moods. I have 2 of those. I got them on Amazon. Recently, I had to replace a few, or I wanted to add a few, and they were like $22. I went to the hardware store years ago and I bought 2 of these things, which are like $12. Screw the bulbs in, plug them in, and then there's an app with no hub. I love that part of it, no hub for me to go in there and control those. And then I have bought 2 stands to be able to clip them up and put them wherever I want them to go. That whole thing can break down and go with me anywhere I need to go if I take it with me, but normally I don't. Under $100 for good lighting. Otherwise, get yourself a good camera. Number 4, your portrait. Your portrait, if you come online and you don't have your video on to start with, which most of us do, have you ever checked the portrait that's showing up to be sure that it doesn't look like this? It's much better to choose a picture and check to see what it looks like to be sure that it's showing your best self, because that's your first impression. And if you really want to have fun with your first impression, let people in on who you are. Put a fun picture up there. But you know, a lot of people shut off their video when they're just listening. And what picture are they seeing? Remember, that's you. So either have a better picture of you or put something there that you want everybody to be seeing every time they look at your little square on the screen. Could I ask you really quickly to all, if you would, as many of you as you want to, pick up your smartphones or your tablets or your tab, go to this, you should be able to, if you're still on the same Slido screen, it should have refreshed by now. Could you answer this question? I'm just curious if the first 4 things I've just given you will cause you to make any adjustments in your office today or going forward. Super. Super. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, super. You know, the truth is when these bars go down to nothing and the none I'm fine as is goes up to like 90 to 100%, I'll stop giving these presentations or I'll take that content out. So far, the bars are coming in pretty much like you're giving me right now. So thank you to the 14 of you who just participated. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are very, very simple and easy. So I'm just going to blast through them so that you have all the content, and then you'll have my contact information if you want to follow up with any questions or any further coaching can be done afterwards. Okay, number 5. Sometimes when you have a fairly long presentation with somebody online, or even a short one, you can actually get them to participate and engage with you, which is the big Achilles heel of presenting online, by literally sending them something for them to open. Now, if you put a link in the Zoom window, Zoom is my favorite tool these days. I don't know how the rest of them are working, but if you put a link in Zoom, they have to literally copy it and paste it into a browser. You can't click on it anymore, so you can't use that little trick. But if you say, I'm sending you an email, could you please open up that PDF now and jump to page 4, because that'll give you the detail behind what I'm showing you now. And all of a sudden, people pick up their mouse or they start engaging with you. So tricks like this, not just email, I mean, we get enough email already, but things like this where you get people to physically do something can very often be all you need to do to keep them engaged when you're presenting. Now, when you're pitching an investor, how many times do you need to engage them in 3 to 5 minutes? Probably once, twice, if that, and then just get to Q&A. But for the longer kinds of presentations where you might want to have an interruption or a break and get people to do something, sending them something can also do that. Sorry, wrong direction. Now, virtual backgrounds. I see people using these virtual backgrounds, and I'm going to tell you folks, they don't make you look good. If you're having friends and family and you want to play with your backgrounds, go ahead and play. But unless you have a professional background that can be seen by all audiences on all the different tools out there, and you don't have to mess around with each tool with their virtual background, what you want to do is get a green screen behind you. When you get a green screen behind you, like in professional photography and videography, then your virtual backdrop will look good. If not, you can end, I've seen people kind of disappear, only half their face, and I'm sure you've seen that too. So for me, I have a professional backdrop here. Let me give you a matrix moment. My backdrop looks like a brick wall, doesn't it? But this is actually the second bedroom upstairs in my home, and all this is a piece of material. And that material has been printed by backdropoutlet.com, and it looks like a real brick wall, especially when I have more lighting on it. When the sunlight hits it, you cannot tell the difference over this 12 megapixel camera that I'm using. You cannot tell it's fake until you touch it. So this gives you the ability to have not only the same backdrop for all of your presentations, you can flip it out and change it out anytime you want. I have 2 more coming this week because I've been using this brick wall for, I don't know, probably 5 years now. And now that everybody's starting to get brick walls and white brick walls and cement brick walls and whatnot, I got to get some new things. But it's not that expensive, and all you need is a couple of stands to hold it up. And that's all you need. Now, if you want branding, all you need to do is get a step and repeat kind of a banner printed, put that behind you, and then every time you do a video call, there's a bit of branding behind you. Maybe you don't have to get it repeated too many times, because that might be a tiny bit obnoxious, but perhaps your logo could be like just above your head in the left corner or something like that. And then every time you get on the video call, when your little snapshot's sitting over here, you're being branded. All right, number 6, secret notes. Now, one of the problems in presenting live in person is that it's sometimes questionable if you know what you're talking about, if you have notes sitting all in front of you. Well, guess what? When you're online, nobody can see those notes. So that should reduce your pressure about some of the things that you want to say without having to remember them, memorize them, or even have a trigger on your slide to say them, because you can have all these little sticky notes all around your laptop or all around behind you, and then you just glance over at them and it tells you what to say, or it reminds you on what to say. Just don't put your written script behind you and read it as if you were on a teleprompter, unless you practice a lot. That's a secret, by the way. I'm not talking about teleprompters today, but there is software that you can use. Put your whole script in it, look at the camera, and the text is right in, behind the camera, and you're going for it, and you could do the entire, Bible and make it seem like you memorized it, but you're doing it through a teleprompter, so long as you don't sound like you're reading. Number 7, interruptions. Now, interruptions presenting from home are going to happen an order of magnitude more than they happen at the office. When interruptions happened at the office when we were in a meeting, it was not a big deal. We would kind of warn people or wave them off or say I'm on the phone kind of thing. But when it happens at home, very interesting things can happen to you as a presenter. If you're a cat lover like me and your cat walks in the room because you forgot to shut the door and they jump up on your shoulder, I have a cat just like this. She loves to sit on my shoulder for half an hour in the morning to get warm. I love how it feels, and my clients can't take their eyes off of that posture. I mean, how many of you have a cat where the cat sits on your shoulder like this? I love it. And so do my clients. And it's okay. Let it happen so long as they don't get in the way. Whoops, sorry. So long as they don't get in the way. If you're a dog lover and the dog hops in your lap, so long as it's not barking and distracting from the meeting, let him in, let her in. It's okay. And part of the reason I know this to be true and okay is because about 20 years ago, I met a friend who had a bird like this. This is not him. And he used to put the bird in the garage. And this is the story he told me. He's a home consultant. He worked from home 100% of the time. And all of his clients were overseas. So the bird would kind of make noise in the background. And one day, one of his clients asked about the bird. So he brought the bird out. And from that day on, the client wanted to see the bird every day. And one day he forgot to put the bird back. Now all his clients want to see the bird. So perhaps the animal in your life or the interruption in your life is the one thing people remember you for, and it's delightful, like your children. Just the other day, I was on a Zoom call with 5 people, and the person talking, daughter walked in, 6 years old, whispered in his ear. He whispered back. She walked out. He said, I love you. She said, I love you. He came back to the meeting. To me, that said more about that person than anything he could have told me about who he is and his philosophy in life, because he told us, he said, I'm sorry for the interruption. My daughter came in to ask me what I wanted for dinner because mom and she are making me dinner. I thought, wow, it's beautiful. It's okay. So whenever things like that happen, don't panic. It's okay. It endears you to your audience. 8, 9, and 10. Number 8 is such a cool thing, which is virtual whiteboards. Now, one way to do a virtual whiteboard with your audience is actually to put the camera back and stand in front of a whiteboard and pick up some markers and do your whiteboard. That's one virtual whiteboard. Obviously, it's a real one, but it's virtual because people are watching you from wherever they are. But when it comes to real virtual whiteboards, I hope you know that tablets and touchscreens with pens or your fingers can be a beautiful way to interact with your online audience. Now, I'm not suggesting you do this for an expo, although maybe, but generally not. But for other meetings, you could go short on the meeting part and go longer on the actual whiteboarding part. Whoops. You can also, if you don't have a tablet readily handy, you can get one of these inexpensive tablets with a pen, and then you have to look at what you're doing, but at least you can do whiteboarding or virtual whiteboarding. And then you can actually write on glass. So some of these offices have all this glass all around. You can actually write on the glass. And then depending on the camera that you have and where you put the camera, you might have to flip it 180 degrees in order for them to read what you're writing, or you have to learn how to write backwards. In a short number of weeks, there's going to be an announcement from a company in the north of Sweden. You will see it on my LinkedIn profile and my LinkedIn feed about a lightweight collaborative whiteboarding software. There'll be a free version and a paid version, but the free version will let you have multiple people working on the same whiteboard at the same time. And I can't wait for it to come out because my testing of it has shown that it just gets people to interact. when you're online, it's beautiful. It's like people where in a room, I would hand out stickies to people and have them go up to the front. Now you can do that online. Last tip before we wrap up is I'm often asked, do I stand or sit when I'm presenting online? I don't care. Do what makes you feel good. Just make sure that you do what we've already talked about. If you're going to stand, raise the camera up and the keyboard if you have to. Make sure you have a clicker that allows you to step away so that you don't have to keep coming back to the keyboard like you might in a real room. If you're sitting, same thing. It's totally up to you. There is no right or wrong here. I've been sitting all day today, but I also know that I have to sit straight so that I don't compress my abdominal cavity and not get the kind of breathing and breath that I need to project. Number 9, backup plans. It's really hard to captivate an audience if after the first slide, your Zoom meeting goes down because the network in your home just got trapped, or it got rebooted, or maybe somebody else in your home is downloading a big file because they forgot that you're online right now and you're at the end of the line like we are here, and no matter what you do, you can't make it any faster. So you must have a backup plan, and if it's really important, you want to have 2 backup plans. The easiest backup plan is if you're by yourself, get into your virtual meeting in the computer that you plan to present on as your main system, whether that's a full-fledged computer or whether it's a Chromebook or an iPad or a tablet, I don't care. But then right next to you, log into that same meeting on a different network. So here in my office, I have this same meeting on my very inexpensive Chromebook sitting off to the side here on the Wi-Fi. My computer I'm presenting on is connected to the Ethernet. And so I make the Chromebook my co-host. And by making my co-host as well as being the host, if my host computer goes down, I should be able to continue with my co-host. And on my co-host machine, I already have the slides dialed up. I would, of course, have to go to the slide. It's not syncing with me right now. That'd be a cool feature, right? But it's not. It would only take me a second or 2 to get to the slide I need to go to. And that way I don't have to panic or worry about this because I can immediately go over to my Chromebook, unmute myself. Now my camera is going to be different because the camera in my Chromebook is a lot crappier than the one I'm using with you right now. And I would not bother to unplug this and plug that into the other one because the other one has a backup camera. But just being a co-host I'm just a one-person company. I don't have the luxury of asking somebody else to be a co-host. In case this goes down, could you please keep the meeting going so I can dial back in kind of thing. Now the backup to the backup, and I did not do this today, even though you are an important audience. I didn't do this today because I've been having extremely good fortune with the internet here, even during the day. And I've only had to go to backup plan A once or B once in like a week or 2. But the backup to plan B, plan C is dial into the call on your smartphone using your carrier's call, your carrier, whether it's whatever that carrier is. You don't use Wi-Fi, don't use internet, use your carrier, dial in on the audio only, mute yourself, set it to the side. And then if all hell breaks loose, if the electricity goes out, it's no big deal. You pick up your smartphone, which is already 100% charged, and you just speak the rest of whatever you have to do. Okay? So that's the backup to the backup. Number 10 is audience interaction. Now, when you're dealing with the expo audience, I want you to be very careful about how much audience interaction you try for, because 3 minutes online is going to seem a lot shorter than 3 minutes in person. To get somebody to go to Slido, like I've asked you to do several times in the last couple hours, and do something will take more time online than it does in person. If you just said, how many of you here, blah, blah, and how many of you are new, that you can do in just a couple of quick seconds. So you might not be able to use a tool like Slido in your expo pitch, but for the one-to-many presentations that you give, or the one-to-many pitching that you do in the future, remember that many of those people on the other end are going to be in their separate siloed locations. And if you want to get a sense for who they are, check out Slido. It's one of many tools out there that allow you to do polling. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, what about using polling in Zoom? You can do that. You can use polling in WebEx and all those other things. The reason I like Slido is twofold. One, it's separate from the tool that I'm using to present with, which makes it easier to have a backup. So as a separate tool, if this computer goes down, Slido is going to continue to work because it's not tied to Zoom. It's actually tied to Google Slides. So all I do is go into my Google Slides, I put in my Zoom questions. As soon as I get to that slide, Zoom's invoked, it does the poll, and then it shuts itself down. So it's just quick and easy, and there's no lots of extra things to do. There's other tools like Slido, but that's just one that the second reason I like it is because I met the company 6 years ago when they first started. So my heart's in it because they're like all of you. They're startups that started with 3 people. Now they're doing incredible things. Another way to interact with your audience, depending on the goal of your pitch, is to gamify it. You can actually use a tool like Kahoot and actually make a game or gamify some of the things you're trying to get the audience to interact with you. Now, when you're pitching investors, I would not try and play a game. I would not. But if you're doing this with partners or perhaps a webinar on your technology, maybe Kahoot could be the one thing that helps you interact with your audience, because we're all struggling with how do you interact with your audience when you're online. And Kahoot just makes it really easy for people to do similar to what you're doing to Slido. No app to download, bing, 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 done. All right, I have a quick bonus for you because I just gave you 10 things. The bonus is that in the Slido's blog, they have, let me get my picture off of this because it's blocking the QR code. See that? The only reason I know that is because I can see it on my other screen here. So hopefully that is now not blocking the QR code and you should be able to read it all. Let me go smaller. Okay, great. And that's it. So in those 15 virtual icebreakers, I guarantee you're going to find a couple that might just be the thing you're looking for to start a meeting, an online meeting where you just have a quick poll at the beginning and everybody grabs their smartphone. They go, now all of a sudden people are laughing hysterically because you just did something that nobody else has done. Number 15 on that list is worth checking out. So here you go. There are the 10 ways that I believe if you start manipulating, using some of these to adjust what you're working with and how you're working, you'll find that your impact that you can make when you're presenting, if you do nothing more than find that voice that lets you be more conversational, softer tone, look at the lens of your camera and imagine the eyeballs of your audience are right there. And then talk to the camera as lovingly or as passionately or as enthusiastically as you would normally talk when you're in person, if not a little bit more. And then, as we started with time, ending with time, if there's any chance you can give your audience back a couple of minutes to get about their business, to get to their next meeting, I would do that. You don't always have to finish on time. And if you see you're going to potentially go late, make sure you remind the person you're meeting with, not on the expo stage, of course, but in other meetings, you can say, Nathan, it's 3 minutes to 11 o'clock. I know we're done at 11 with you because you have something coming up afterwards. So I just want to make sure, are there any last minute questions before we schedule the meeting for next week or whatever your ask is? Keep your eye on the clock, very similarly that I just did here. And with the minutes on the clock, I would like to say, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to spend these 2 hours with you, to share with you how you can be more effective when captivating your audiences, not just online, but when you get back into the rooms. Everything we've just talked about here can apply as well, including Slido. I used to use Slido in rooms where I had more than 100 people, because that way, sometimes 50, but more than 100, that way people anywhere in the room could ask questions, and then I can go check into those questions. And that really did elicit more questions from audiences quite often versus people raising their hands and calling on them and things like that. And the ability to upvote questions helps you as a speaker because now you just cover the questions that are most popular. So the last thing I'd like to offer you is this. The QR code that you see on the screen right now is my contact QR code. It's my electronic business card. If you just scan it, or you can use the web address on the left there, mingle.no for Norway /Nathan. At the bottom of my business card, I want to draw your attention to two things. One, my network is vast, worldwide network. I'm connected to a lot of people. The number's not important. But if you'd like to connect with me, even though we haven't met, the offer stands. Click the LinkedIn, connect with me, just say, hey, I met you online at the webinar, Plug and Play. I will accept, even though we haven't met. And then you can look at my network, and if there's anybody you want to meet in my network, all you need to do is ask and tell me what you want me to say to them. And I'd be happy to introduce you. And the second thing I want to do is offer you a free copy of my most recently published book called Harness Your Speaking Anxiety and Connect Emotionally with Your Audience. There's 18 tools you can use to help you harness your anxiety of speaking. And then there's a bunch of things in here, 10 more things you can do to connect emotionally. That link, the electronic version of this book, is the first link on the left at the bottom of my business card. Just scroll down, click that link, and you'll have my book downloaded before I say, thank you so much for your time today. Good luck. Please stay in touch. And if there's anything I can do for you in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.